Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wine.com Experiences. I'm Gwendolyn Osborne. And today we are doing Finger Lakes and France, which is a very exciting tasting where we will be tasting two wines from the Finger Lakes region in New York and two wines from classic regions in France. And of course, we will be joined by two renowned winemakers to help lead us through it all. We have four wines to taste today. And in order, what we're going to be tasting are the two wines from the Finger Lakes, the Forge Cellars Classic Dry Riesling and the Hillock and Hobbs Estate Vineyard Riesling. And then we'll move on to France with the Chateau de Saint-Côme, Côte de Rhône, Les Deux Albions, and the Crocus L'Atelier Malbec de Cahors. So if you already purchased this quartet of wines from Wine.com, wonderful. This is definitely the time to make sure those bottles are open and get them into some glassware if you have not already. And of course, these wines, this quartet, or the wines on their own are all still available on Wine.com. And this video is always able to be visited on our Wine.com YouTube channel. So to talk about these wines with us, we are excited to welcome two world-renowned winemakers presenting the Forge and the Saint-Côme. We have Louis Barruol from France. Welcome, Louis.
Hello everyone.
Thank you. And here to taste us through the Hillock and Hobbs, as well as the Crocus, Cahors, Paul Hobbs.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you both so much for being here to taste and talk about your wines that you make across spanning the Atlantic. I know, Louis, you're up late, so appreciate that as well. We're excited to talk both about France and the Finger Lakes, but I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about your newer ventures into the Finger Lakes, because I feel like this is a region not on everyone's radar, that people aren't as familiar with. And the wines we're tasting today are such perfect examples of the incredible wines being made there. So let's talk about this very special place. Paul, I wanted to start with you because I know it's kind of near your hometown, if you will. So what drew you here specifically to make wine?
Well, Gwendolyn, my mother grew up not far away at the base of another lake nearby, Cayuga Lake, in Ithaca, New York. And my parents met at Cornell University. I grew up in Niagara County, New York. But we'd come to this area from time to time and got to know, particularly the southern tip of the lakes, where we saw more rock and so on and so forth. But really what happened later is that my father met Dr. Constantine Frank, and he was one of the pioneers of the region, as you know, and also Herman Wiemer, and he would slip out. I'm talking now in the late 60s, early 70s. He would, on winter weekends, my dad would disappear to the Finger Lakes and kind of get to know these guys. And so we began converting some of our orchards to vineyards as a result of these trips. My father would come home with the lore. Then finally, while I was a graduate student, I was really mainly a student of the Mosels. Those were my first love. And because of the great opportunities I've had in my career traveling around, I always felt that this region in the Americas, above all other regions, could do justice and compete with the Germans and the Austrians and the very best of Europe. And so that led me on a search to bring it home to America.
Fantastic. I feel like if you had a memoir, you could have it be like from Mosel to Malbec. Right? Love some alliteration. Well, it's beautiful. I'm excited to taste these wines and have you talk a little bit more about them, especially that sense of place. Louis, what about you in the Rhône region of France? What drew you to the Finger Lakes to make wine? I think it was a little over 10 years ago.
Yeah, my American partner, Rick Rainey, and myself founded Forge Cellars in 2011. And he's really the one who took me to this region, because we were friends, and he has always deeply loved this region where he's been living for a long time. And personally, I've always been a great fan of great terroir, obviously, but cold climates, because I don't think the best wines are made in the hottest climate. I think tempered climate or cold climate are more interesting to make refined, mineral-oriented, complex wines. And you find all of this in the Finger Lakes. And I think this region is designed to be the primary region in the US for complex mineral-oriented white wines, even if it's maybe not the case yet in terms of notoriety, but it definitely has the potential to be this region. And as I am crazy, I decided to begin a winery from scratch in a region which is very tough. I mean, it's a quite tough climate. You are in the northern limit of Riesling, more or less. And there was never a day when I regretted this choice, even if it's tough sometimes. But the potential of this place is so high that the adventure is great.
Yes, yes. You put in all the effort with the big challenge, and the results, when they're magical, are even more worth it. So let's taste this wine, because I think that talking about this region, it's difficult as a winemaker, yes, and it's also difficult to well, it's not difficult, but it's something that we want to do more of, is to introduce more people to these wines. And I think these are, like I said, wonderful, perfect examples to get people excited about drinking more Finger Lake wine. So the Forge here, this is the dry Riesling, the Classique bottling. So can you tell us a little bit about this wine, where it comes from in the Finger Lakes, and how it's made?
Yeah, it's we actually approach this region in a quite French way, I would say, in the sense we have been always having the goal to classify the southeast part of the Seneca Lake, a little bit like Burgundy. I mean, not all the terroirs are equal, and one of the jobs of a grower is to know what is great, what is good, what is average, what is. So our road has been to explore all these terroirs, and we have vinified more than 100 plots in the nearby area. In this area of the lake, which is the hottest, the locals call it the banana belt, because the microclimate is relatively hot. And in a cold country, this is what you want to drive the ripeness to the place you want it to be. So we have been doing that for years to identify the best places. And so this wine, the Forge Classic, is the result of this work. This is a blend of many different plots, pretty much all of them in the same altitude of the slope, where you find the best shale, right? The best soils, basically. And it's made on a quite non-interventionist way. I mean, we don't use yeast. We use indigenous yeast, right? We tend to pick ripe, and the most important thing is probably to remember this is a bone dry Riesling. I mean, residual sugar is a big thing in the world of Riesling, and from the very beginning we have been strong defenders of bone dry Rieslings, because the good level of ripeness you get in this region allows you to not keep any sugar, and it makes fresher wines, more balanced wines, wines which goes marvelously with food, you see, and we think it's the right way, it's the right style for this region. So we make our wines in old oak, which is a quite Alsatian, if not German, way to deal with Riesling. And the fermentations are very long. They last sometimes for 6, 7, 8 months, which is not always funny to handle, not always very, very easy, but this is the way Riesling is when you leave it work by itself.
Yeah, so let's taste it. I would love to have you kind of talk us through the aromas, the flavors, the structure, and how that really represents that terroir, because I know that's kind of what drives you, is that sense of terroir.
Yeah. As Paul was mentioning Germany, and it's always interesting when you compare to Germany, you suddenly see that it's quite different. It's obviously not German Riesling, but what we want to achieve is that our wine is more related to its soil and its origin than to its grape. You see, the goal is not to have much a Riesling expression. The goal is to have a Southeast Seneca Lake expression, which is probably more interesting to have a sense of place than a sense of grape, because you can grow Riesling in so many places. But what the DNA of the Rieslings in this area, this is how we approach it, is that this is more Burgundian than German or Alsatian. It's a great balance. It's a good softness, but supported by great salinity. It's very salty, and you can achieve that without any sugar.
Mm-hmm. And Riesling is such an expressive grape, so to have it be its own grape, but also to express that sense of place and do that very well, separates it, as you were saying, from places elsewhere that make great Riesling.
Yeah, a grape needs to be a translator, and some grapes are better translators than others. And Riesling is one of the most fantastic translators of soil, because it can be so transparent that it really helps you. And in this way, it really looks like Grenache. You know, Grenache can be anything. It can be a horrible rosé, and it can be a fantastic red which ages for 30 years. It's a great translator of place, and in this way it reminds me of Riesling very much.
Very much so. And Riesling it's a great translator, which I love that expression. And it's also very food friendly. So when you're thinking of these dry Rieslings that express this kind of wonderful salinity and the kind of citrus fruits and the really kind of steely minerality, what are your favorite things to pair with this?
Well, it's one of the only wines which can match spices and Asian food. You know, usually spices kill the wines, but not a good Riesling from the Finger Lakes. And I want to mention that. But it's globally speaking a very good chameleon when you come to food. I mean, it's going to pair really well with fish. You can go grilled vegetables. You can go by itself before the meal for aperitif. It's a fantastic friend for your everyday life. It's a great food wine, which is not the case of every wine in the world. You know, once again, they are not all equal with this, but Riesling is really fantastic for food. And for me, wine is food. I mean, wine is friendship. It's food. It's a meal. It's sharing something with your friends. So yeah.
I absolutely agree. And these two wines I've had several times now in my home after tasting them for the first time, because they are so wonderfully versatile. So thank you for making such a fantastic wine. Paul, we're going to move on and taste the Hillock and Hobbs Estate Vineyard Riesling. So tell us a little about your spot on Seneca Lake, because you're on the same lake, but different. So tell us a little bit about that spot and working with Riesling there.
Well, we're not far from Louis. We're a little bit further south, but as you mentioned, we're the southern tip of Seneca Lake, and the lake is carved out during the glacial period. So you have these very uniform slopes north to south, and they get progressively steeper as you move toward the lake. We wanted good air drainage and good water drainage. And so these steep slopes I thought were extremely important, as Louis sort of pointed out, given the climate of the region, which can be highly variable from rainfall, quite a lot of rainfall, to droughty seasons. And you'll see even in this photo, we have some drip irrigation and we're on very rocky site. And so we spent roughly a little over 2.5 years searching for a site before we decided. And normally, by the way, I should mention that normally the way that I approach a new project is to buy grapes from growers, but we could not find that the way that fruit was being grown, the way the vineyards were set up. Most of the vineyards were opposed to the fall line, and so they were trapping air and trapping water, and that was a problem. So we decided to start with a clean slate, so to speak, clear the land and develop it from scratch. And that's the first time I've ever started a project like this. So it's become actually quite expensive to do that. And we learned why it wasn't the Germans that planted the Mosel, it was the Romans, because they had slaves. So, and we felt it was very important, and I think Louis would concur with this. We felt it was very important. As he said, we're kind of at the limit or at the margins of where grape growing can be done. Even though, if you were to look at where we're situated on the map relative to Europe, we're in the southern part of Spain, or at least just above where Portugal is located, in the Galicia region. But because of the way air comes, we have nothing to block cold air coming down from the Arctic. There's no mountain range or anything of that nature, so we can get a lot of cold weather. And I had been consulting in Canada, in Niagara on the Lake, for a number of years. Well, that really re-engaged my interest, but we knew that we needed this airflow, and that's why we spent so long looking for this site. But we also wanted a very rocky site, and slate was an important factor, slate and shale. And as you go further down toward the tips of the lake, the southern tips, that's where you hit the most of it. And so to put a vine in the ground, we had to develop a special tool to do that, because there was no soil. All we had was rock, and it was layer caked. So it was just, like, a flat rock in layers. And so the only way to bust through it and put a vine in the ground was to take a huge steel tooth on a massive machine and punch a hole into the ground. And then put the plant in and put some soil with it. And so it's been an enormous undertaking, but I like what Louis said. I agree with him. This transparency that Riesling is unique. It has the ability to translate soil, and it's really tremendous. I mean, it also gives that sort of same kind of characteristic. It also translates climate, but particularly soil. Yeah. And as these are very young vines, so this is our first release, Gwendolyn, and it is, we're talking here a wine that's, the vines are now in their 5th year. And because
I was going to ask that next, of when you planted.
Very young.
Yeah. Okay.
These wines will only get better because as the roots take time, they find a crack in the rock, and then they go down, but only for an inch or two before they hit
another crack.
Slate tabletop, and then they've got to crawl along for a distance before they can find another crack and go down deeper. So it takes them time to really lay down the roots. And we've noticed that versus my work in other parts of Europe or South America or California, that the vines grow much more slowly. And I think this is going to be very interesting for quality.
patience will be rewarded, I am sure, because already from this wine, having tasted this on its 5th year, it's just quite excellent. So talk us through this wine as we taste it, kind of the flavor profile and how it's representing those rocks that you have chosen.
Yeah, well, Louis said some really important things, and I think he's talking about really sustainable farming and winemaking in a very natural way. So we practice. We haven't compared notes here. I've never met Louis, unfortunately, until today. I've heard wonderful things, but the thing is, we're also working with indigenous yeast. Those are yeast that are off the bloom of the grape. So we're not adding commercial yeast that are produced in a factory. And what we found is that Riesling is made very much in a way that Chardonnay is made. We hand pick it, sometimes even at night. We whole cluster it to press, and we take the clear juice and ferment it. Now, this Riesling was made without any wood at all. So this is, and it is, when we say bone dry in the New York area, they say bone dry, but it's not bone dry. But Louis' wine is bone dry, and ours is very close. We have about 3 or 4 grams of sugar, but because of the natural acidity. Mm-hmm. And what I love about these, the grape is totally and physiological mature at a very low sugar. So the wine can have 11.5% alcohol and be full of flavor and totally mature and ripe. And so you can drink a bottle very easily. And I think Louis touched on that as well. So what we're after here and is just an expression of the site, of the soil, and what we think great Riesling can be. But as you can see between these two wines, there is tremendous difference, and we're only a few miles apart.
Yeah. That is the true sense of place. I mean, you've both been comparing it a little bit to Chardonnay or Burgundy, which again, when you're there in Burgundy, the same thing happens, just a few plots apart. Yes. Also great translators here, but yes, and I do love that. I love that these wines are lower in alcohol. They're around 12%. And yes, it's just so much help. It just makes it work so much better for food and for evening. So I appreciate that. But they're dry and they have that wonderful full ripe characteristic to it. But yeah, the minerality on this is beautiful. The texture is just stunning on that. And I forgot to ask Louis, and I will ask you right after this, but on aging Rieslings from the Finger Lakes, what are your thoughts on that? Paul, I'll start with you.
Me?
Yes, sorry, start with you.
Well, we don't really know. Louis has more experience.
This is your first vintage.
But you know what? We feel that we've seen that time in the bottle, these wines appreciate considerably. When they're first bottled, they're still very tight, and this is still a baby. I mean, it's 3 years old, or a little over 2.5 years old, and this wine is just beginning to open up and show all the character, and it will continue to get better for easily another 10 years and probably much more. I wouldn't be surprised, and I taste Louis' wine as well. I wouldn't be surprised that wine would age beautifully for 20 years.
Well, I'm about to find out from him, but first I would like to know from you, what are your favorite food pairings?
Well, I don't think I can say it better than Louis already said. I mean, of course, Riesling sells very well in the Asian markets because there are a lot of spicy foods there. And whether you're in Thailand or you're in Hong Kong, it really, or in Japan for that matter, these are big sellers there because, yeah, as delicate and as feminine as the wine is, you might expect, well, it wouldn't handle intense spice. And this is just like a marriage made in heaven. Yeah. And so you can't go wrong. And of course, any kind of shellfish or fish dish, but even white meats can go very nicely. And we've had, depending on how they're sauced and so on and so forth, that kind of pairing, it can be stunning. So we almost open up every meal in the evening with Riesling. Sometimes we finish it with Riesling. Yeah. We find it so versatile on it, and I just can't. Louis hit all those key points, so I don't want to belabor what he already said.
Well, thank you. I mean, well done. I'm excited for everything to come from this, especially since we started out right out of the gate. So We are going to move on to France, but before we do, Louis, we're going to start with the Saint Côme, but your wines, you've had, a little over 10 years with these wines on their aging potential. What have you seen?
Excuse me, are you still talking about the Riesling? Or?
Sorry, yes, I am going back and forth, and I apologize. But before we start tasting the red, yes, your Riesling, the Riesling in the Finger Lakes, the aging. Have you seen them evolve?
Yeah, it's one of the strong grape characteristics of Riesling is its ability to age. Once again, some grapes have more of this ability than others, and Riesling has naturally a very low pH, tends to be high in acidity, and then it globally speaking ages really well, and it's the case in the Finger Lakes. We have experienced fantastic evolutions over the years of our wines, even sometimes surprising in a very good way. So it's one of the beauties of these wines that we make in this region is that the level of physiological ripening is so good that you can enjoy these wines while they are young, no problem. They are very civilized, they are very friendly. And as you age them, you're going to find more complexity. You're going to find a more obvious expression of the place, of the origin, of the soil. You're going to find more precision. They are going to improve, and they are going to be, most of the time, even better. But this is not the kind of wine you have to wait for a long time to get some pleasure. I mean, it's relatively great to taste at all times.
It is delicious right now. So, and
it's a great aspect of the wines we make there. Yeah.
Okay, well, we are going to move to France to taste the Chateau Saint Côme Côte du Rhône wine that we have here. So I know your family's been there for quite some time, but tell us a little bit about what you and maybe your father and grandfather have done these past few years especially with the Côte du Rhône wine.
Yeah, the family has been in Saint Côme since the end of the 15th century, so it's a very, very, very long story. Obviously, our DNA is to grow the old vines of Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre, and Cinsault, Carignan in the limestone, because we are in a land of limestone, which makes my work totally different than the Finger Lakes, obviously. And when you have several projects in different places, one of the most difficult things is to forget about your success, to forget about what you know, and relearn entirely from scratch, because the recipes don't work in the same way in different places. So obviously it's very, very different exercise. So yeah, the limestone brings us a lot of finesse, a lot of freshness, a lot of precision in the wine. And as we talk about this specific wine, which is Deux Albions Côte du Rhône 19, it would be difficult to make a red wine on a more traditional way. I mean, this is full bunches, this is co-fermented, all these grapes co-ferment together in the same old big concrete vat with these thick walls, which gives you a fantastic thermic energy, right? It's a long maceration, 6 weeks. It's obviously indigenous yeast, and the wine is aged for 18 months in concrete tanks, and it's unfiltered.
So no oak.
No oak. It never sees the oak. Mm-hmm. It's basically how my grandfather would make his wines. It would be difficult to make it on a more simple way, but winemaking is like cooking. the most difficult is to do simple things. Simple seems easy, but actually simple is probably the most difficult, you know, because you have to anticipate and think about everything beforehand to end up with a wine which has a purity.
Mm-hmm.
So for this wine, we are not looking for a wine which is extraordinary, but we want it to be pure, to be a nice, balanced, and complex, and express the soul of the Southern Rhone.
So yeah, so we have so it's in concrete vats. There's no oak. It's unfiltered. They're co-fermented, which is fantastic. What is the blend? You had mentioned the grapes that you're growing. It's primarily Grenache.
Sorry, the blend is Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre, Carignan, Clairette. So Clairette is a white grape. So there's a small proportion of this white grape, which is quite traditional in the Rhone Valley to co-ferment the reds with a bit of white. It gives a certain element of lightness, you know, an element of freshness, because we are in a tempered Mediterranean climate, so it's not crazy hot, but it's a little hot. So you always have to watch and check that the wines are balanced. You never want a wine is too big or too full of alcohol. So it's an opposite problem. I mean, in the lakes we often miss the ripening.
Yes, the southern Rhone usually doesn't have that problem to reach ripeness levels. So talk us through the kind of the taste and the aromas and the palate, because it's fresh, it's juicy, it's just like a big bowl of red delicious fruit. It's just so inviting.
Yeah, it's the aromas. We often have very floral aromas in this wine, like the violet, the peony, things like that. And then you go to black fruit like blackberry, strawberry, and you're gonna find the licorice. You're gonna find the pepper, which is a marker of Grenache, and in the mouth, you find what you often find in Grenache in the Southern Rhone, a mix of softness and power. So the Grenache gives you this wonderful softness, but in the meantime, there is a lot of strength, and it has some power. You know, it's the DNA of Grenache, and around Grenache, you're going to find the tannins of Mourvèdre, the masculinity of Mourvèdre, and the blackberry characters of Syrah, and some of the freshness of the white and of the Carignan. So, you know, the Southern Rhone is an area of co-fermentation. Our tradition is co-fermenting the grapes. Why? Because out of using several grapes, you're going to generate a good balance, you know. To have the balance out of one grape is probably more difficult, because you need the perfect climate for this grape. By mixing, you dilute the risk, and you give you more chances to get a good balance.
Yes, but it is a beautiful wine. It's like it's all these grapes, and they're all getting along, and they're producing this wonderful wine for everybody to enjoy. So it's a nice thought, and it's beautiful. It's delicious. It makes me want to go to France. So thank you for making such a lovely wine. So Paul, we are going to move over to Cahors. And for those who aren't as familiar, I don't think we have a map, but Cahors is southeast from Bordeaux in France, and it has been making Malbec for years, long before Malbec was cool anywhere else. So Paul, can you tell us a little bit about the history of Malbec in Cahors and what brought you there?
Well, the region, as you mentioned, is in southwest France. So Probably the way that's, let's say, easiest or quickest to get in there is to land in Toulouse, where they assemble Airbus and take about an hour's drive to the north. And this district is basically very mountainous, difficult to access, and maybe about a 2.5-hour drive from Bordeaux. So Bordeaux, as you mentioned, would be to the west.
Mm-hmm.
It is, as you can see here, the region has a river that runs through it, and it's snaky. It winds and wends its way back and forth, and finally ends up in the estuary, out in the Gironde River and out to the ocean. Cahors, for that reason, at one time, it was one of the greatest regions of Southwest France. In fact, from what I've read, the region is said to have been more important than Bordeaux. But it struggled a bit. The Bordelais put some taxes on it. They controlled the ports, and they also were helped by the British in terms of distributing their wines. And so Cahors was sort of cut off from the market. Classically, I think the Romans also were here. They developed the region to some degree, and I think they also brought vines here. So this is the homeland of Malbec. The Malbec grape was brought to Argentina, where I helped popularize it there in my work in the late 80s, early 90s, and kind of helped put that as a finger or stamp on their most important variety, or what they're known for. And I would say, but these regions are very different. And so the reason I ended up I always, of course, wanted to kind of see the region. And these are called the black wines of Cahors because they were so inky and so, well, tannic. They were, the way they were making the wines for the last several years, and I think they had become sort of insular as a region. And they weren't looking outward. Their techniques were a bit medieval, you might say, for the majority of the production that they were doing. So they were probably over extracting and making very powerful wines, but with very little finesse and elegance. And when I was talking to the winemakers on my first visit, I said, they would just extract to no end. There was never enough. And maybe that was the perfect combination for the cuisine, which is mostly foie gras and truffles. And cheeses, of course. So actually paired quite nicely. But as was shown in one of the photographs, the soils here are red clays and limestone. And they're a nice mix. And actually, when you look at the French geological maps, you'll see this is a soil type. This is what's on our plateau region. This is the plateau. There's several terraces as well. But the plateau has all this limestone intermixed with red clay, and you can see the iron, small creations of iron inside the clay. Well, that's what gives this clay the red color. And that obviously has a huge influence. So if you go to Burgundy, you'll see very similar soils. And I was amazed on my first visit when I saw the soil that this looks so similar to Burgundy. And they said, well, let me take you to a big map of France. And sure enough, this region was formed during the Jurassic period, is the same type of soils that you'd find in Burgundy, but with a very different varietal growing there.
Yeah.
So that really drew me to the area. This is such a incredible, from a soil perspective, it's like it's a winemaker's playground.
Yeah, and of course, with your knowledge and your experience of, growing and nurturing Malbec in Argentina, coming to its, birthplace to see how that works is probably just such a fantastic project and the perfect one for you. So I would love to have you walk us through tasting this wine, but the aromas, the flavors, the structure, and kind of how it says, oh, this is Malbec from Cahors. This is my black wine from Cahors.
Well, it was very funny. I've never imagined in my lifetime, even though I worked as one of the original winemakers on Opus One, that I would be invited by the French to make wine in France. And the French, they took a big risk to bring an American because they all, so many enologos, winemakers.
Yeah, they know what they're doing out there already. So,
so that's actually what we do here, Gwendolyn, is because in Cahors, if you're following the DOC, you can work with Malbec and Merlot, but this is all Malbec. And to really characterize the wine, first of all, it is quite deep in color, and you can see that it has some purple and even bluish violet tones as well. That's classic. You know you're dealing with Malbec when you have that color, that pigmentation profile. So the appearance is classic, and what we do here is the main thing is to control the extraction, because there's a lot of blue, violet, and black fruit, and also as Malbec is classic for picking up violets, it's florals, and so I think you can find that very lifted in the nose. It's very aromatic, and it's just a hint of that floral component as well. In the mouth, it's quite full. It's medium, I would say a medium weight. Lots of energy. There's a salinity, a saline character as well, like crushed rock and wet rock, you know, a little sea salt, that kind of thing going on the palate as well.
Am I getting a little like smokiness? Is that what I'm getting on the palate? No. On
the palate? That might be.
No, that might be the crushed rocks. It could be just.
I think it might
like
be the crushed rock.
The dustiness of the rocks. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. Is like the dusty soil, good earth style.
Yeah,
that's good. It's so different than that, but it has that salinity. I feel like it's almost like the iron. You know, after you said that, you kind of are like, oh, now I taste it.
Well, you know, we kind of like remember Churchill's famous quote about a velvet glove and an iron fist, and but we try to get there's an iron structure to the wine, and we think, of course, the soil is making that contribution, but there's also this lovely suppleness to the tannins as well. But this wine requires, in its élevage, requires a tremendous amount of oxygen. It needs to breathe.
It's like the opposite of the Grenache. It's like, the opposite now it's like, oh, let's just hold it in. And this one we're like, woo, give it some air. And that's just another example of how different grapes can be, and how, you know, everything, so much happens in the vineyard, but also just how you nurture those grapes to make sure they come to their full expression is so important.
And it's fun, you know, Louise was talking about the co-fermentation concept, right? Here, we don't do that it's just, we play in a different way. And here we would ferment, well, actually, we only allow 2 varieties in the DOC. But we separate and do all independent fermentations, and then we blend afterward. And that's, in this particular circumstance, that's what works. And it's just kind of fun that these variables make it our work. I like what Louise said about no recipes.
Right. That I love the cooking too, of when you're talking about, you know, Riesling, of that one central, and then we're talking about blending, and what you're doing with the blending, and then in co-fermentation, kind of throwing it in, and here where you're really more methodical. So it's kind of like cooking.
Very much so. And in the case, I was curious with Louise, here the Malbec is quite stringy and very loose clustered, and the stem is very, very thin, and it's red. So we do some whole cluster fermentation where we don't break the grapes and we don't take off the stem. So there's a combination of whole cluster, like the way you would make a Pinot Noir, the classic way, although they still debate that in Burgundy, whether it's better to do it that way or not. But we find that with some whole cluster fermentation, we get a carbonic maceration. Some of that, I think Louis mentioned a strawberry note. So we get some red fruits as well, some nice freshness from that.
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, these were both beautiful examples of some classics, but with, you know, their own twist from you, brilliant gentlemen. So in the Finger Lakes, can we visit your properties by chance in the Finger Lakes? Paul, do you have open doors yet?
We're in process. In fact, as you asked, Gwendolyn, we are completing a building that will be ready, knock on wood, by the end of May. And so, yes, we're hoping to open a facility. It'll be small, but it's overlooking the entire lake. So it's a spectacular location where you can see the vineyard. And yes, you'll be able to do that hopefully by June 1.
And Louis, is there anything for Forge?
Yeah, we at the beginning we were selling in the distribution in the US, but it's been 2-3 years that we have organized ourselves to receive people because we think it's fundamental. The lakes are truly an extraordinary, beautiful region. It's wonderful. There's great restaurants. The lakes are marvelous, great forests. There's so much to do. The wines are nice, and it's. I think it's important. It's our duty to receive the people, our customers. So at Forge we have a tasting room where we take people by appointment because we prefer to give 1 hour of a great tasting with different wines. We take a group of people, right? So you register and you're going to taste with 6-7 other people. We can open more bottles. So it's a proper nice tasting that we offer. And we have as well a place called Le Salon, a French word, where people can come and eat some sardines, some pata negra, and have a flight of wines. And it's nice. And it's part of the lake's culture to do that. And we like to do it in a welcoming and very quality way. So yes, people can contact us, go on the site and book and come in. And I want to say, Paul, I really want to see you in the.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is like, can we all go to lunch? I'm going to come visit. I think we should all go to lunch.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be so great. Let's do that.
It's just we need to meet. I mean, we are so close. So let's meet next time. And I want to see to all our American friends and consumers. I mean, taste the Riesling from the lakes, drink them. They really deserve the attention. They are not only wines of freshness and pleasure. They are truly great terroir wines of high level. So please pay attention. It's very nice and important.
They are the great translators of the Finger Lakes. So, and I was asking for our customers, but I was also asking for myself. It sounds like a wonderful place to visit, amazing wines to try. I want to thank you both so much. Paul will definitely stay tuned to when you're opening up, hopefully in May by the summer. Just delicious wines, great expressions of Finger Lakes, delicious expressions from France. I hope those of you watching enjoyed the wines, enjoyed the conversation. Again, I learned a lot myself. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, Louis. Merci.
A real pleasure. Thank you very much, Gwendolyn.
Yeah. So cheers, and hopefully we'll see you up near Seneca Lake.
Thank you, Gwendolyn.
After the snow melts.
Yeah, after the snow melts.
It's both a science and a form of high art. It's made from the combination of grapes, sunlight, rain, soil, and time. It's raised up in the moments that matter. It's wine. And we are Wine.com. We have the largest wine selection in the world, online sommeliers with free advice, and now our powerful new app puts the entire world of wine in your hands. Wine.com. Seriously passionate about wine. Download our free app today.